You know, I swore to them I knew how to work this before the session started. I actually said no to the orientation. Welcome to Securing Your Company's Next Big Bang. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Andrew Krug. I'm a security evangelist for Datadog, and I'm really happy to be here again at reInvent with my co-speaker, Nathan Case, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Nathan Case. I've spoken at reInvent a number of times with Andrew, and it's good to be back. You're sweet. Thank you.
So you may have seen us before at reInvent 2019. I think that was the last time that we're all together again in person. I don't know if anybody was in that session. No, nobody was in that session.
Does anybody remember 2019?
But in case you did miss it, the link's up here. This is actually a talk that's really relevant material for what we're going to be speaking about today, but it's also supplemental. So if you're interested in runbooks, playbooks, and incident response, you might want to check out that session on YouTube.
Definitely. So this talk is really about the growth of Resilience, the company that I work for now. Resilience is a biomanufacturing firm that really is a technical company or a technology company at its core. So as we look at what Resilience is, we'll do that in a minute, I think it's a little bit pertinent to talk about the things that build into why you make something or why you create a company like Resilience, so that as we talk about some of the explosive growth and the different M&A types of things that happen, it makes a little bit more sense as to why we're doing what we're doing. I will point out on this slide of all slides, I'm a security geek. I am not a scientist. I have ideas about most of these things, but couldn't tell you deeply about any of them. My job as the security geek for Resilience is effectively to protect these things from both internal and outside individuals. So that's what my team does. Doesn't necessarily mean that I can answer your questions about nucleic acids, however. So if you ask questions about it at the end, I'm afraid I will probably smile and defer to someone else. As we get into this, the concept of biomanufacturing, the concept of creating vaccines, the concept of creating medical things that help humans really kind of became this thing over the course of 2019 and 2020 that was really at the core of a lot of folks' minds and thoughts. And as we look at the things that really impacted a lot of the creation of vaccines or the creation of curative items in 2019, we kind of, as a group, as humanity, began to realize that the thing that was the blocker really was laboratories and factories. We couldn't get factories fast enough, we couldn't get laboratories fast enough to develop vaccines, to build the vaccines, to make the vaccines for people to actually be able to take. We couldn't get things done quickly enough, and that really was a problem. We've got a couple of t-shirts up here I'm going to use as a gift, if that's okay for everybody, if you answer questions, not to, bribe you. Anybody know how long it takes to build a factory to make medicine? Want to hazard a guess? Dude in the back? 2 years. Keep going, but close. That was a bad throw. 5 years is closer. So as we look at these things, it's one of those things where you begin to build this thing and it's a factory and that's great, but we have a lot of things that go into it. And because we have a lot of things that go into it, we start seeing these blockers come up for new factories being created. We start seeing these blockers come up for the ability to produce medical anything really through these factories because it takes a long time to make them. Now, I've been involved in the creation at Resilience of a couple of laboratories, and I can tell you that those take a long time to make and actually make work. So as we look at things that go into this, before we even get to the factories, we have to have something that is optimized. We have to make a recipe. Now, again, not a scientist, but from a brewing beer point of view, very similar. So as we look at this, we're going to have to create a recipe. That recipe has to be optimized. Once we've optimized that recipe and I actually have a recipe to make my beer, I have to then deal with how I'm going to get the hops and the barley and everything else to make my beer, which is basically supply chain and manufacturing. These problems have been around for a long time, 1,000 years, right? Nothing new here. But they've continued to be hard to do. And as we get into quality and we start talking about building a factory and then creating anything that's going to go into a human, and then dealing with the quality control for making sure that it's safe for it to go into a human, we start to get into a lot of paperwork. We start to get into a lot of blockers. We start to get very, very slow. And this ends in mostly bespoke processes. A lot of the processes we use today, really honestly, look really similar to the processes that we used many, many, many years ago. I've heard people say that it looks very similar to the way things were done in the 1940s and 50s. Not an expert here, I'm quoting someone else. And that means that we have a lot of legacy equipment. We have equipment that very politely is used repeatedly because it's just a 4,000 liter container. It has a controller on it that doesn't really need to be updated. It does one thing and it does it quite well. Now, Andrew and I have spoken repeatedly about the way clouds work and the way that DevSecOps can improve your business or improve your enterprise. And all of these things look really familiar to me, and I hope to Andrew, as processes that generally are very manual. And so as we talk about the way that biomanufacturing works, the reason for resilience is being, I'm pointing this out because the reality is that this is a very manual process. Now, I realize that we're not at a security summit or a security talk, but from a security point of view, does anybody remember what we used to say about humans touching data? Should humans touch data? Say it out loud. There we go. All right. So if humans shouldn't be touching data, why not? Well, humans cause error, humans cause delay, there's cost. Humans generally, as much as we would like them to be very transparent about the things that they're doing, they forget. They have finite human brains that don't always remember everything that they did. Beyond that, we have regulatory failure that is caused by a human making a mistake or forgetting something. So, what happens? Well, resilience comes into being. We begin to think about ways to actually turn some of the things that we took for granted in the cloud, that we learned in the cloud, that we are, frankly, still learning in the cloud, and taking these brand new technical processes, these new ways of thinking, and applying them to a very interesting bioengineering, biomanufacturing world. And what does that mean? Does that mean that we're immediately going to transform everything? Well, obviously not. There are a lot of things that come into play here. We all know about the FDA, yes? There are a lot of regulatory things that go into making drugs, making vaccines, making all of the things that we put in our body for good reason. We need to make sure they're safe. But part of that scenario means that we have two words. And you will note that qualification and validation both have capital letters here. Do you know why validation and qualification have capital letters here? Because they are significantly painful processes that will ruin your life. Not really. They are a pain in the butt, though. They are a significant amount of time and energy so that we can validate that we understand the way a process is running and that we can make sure that process happens the exact same way over and over and over again. Now, if I was giving this talk for the cloud architecture stuff, that would be something that we would automate. Something that we've automated for years in the cloud. But it's not something that's reached the biomanufacturing world yet. And in some cases it has a little bit, but as we talk about some of these things, we have to understand that a lot of the things that we're doing now, we have to teach or we have to help people understand what software development lifecycle is, and we have to help them understand how they can change the automation processes they have for making a vaccine into something more like a software development lifecycle. So, how can we move fast? So historically, development, it's all manual. It's waterfall, it's slow. Qualification and validation, I can personally speak to the 200 pages that this is. Who enjoys literally having to remember how to run their printer so that they can sign a paper with ink? Not fun. Ops. This ends up being very manual as well. So now we've got an entire development cycle, soup to nuts, that effectively is a manual process. Now this, again, is why resilience exists. Resilience's goal is to take all of these things on the left and automate them to use things that we have in the cloud, like landing zones, like automated whitelisting, like compliance dashboards that we've proven in other industries can actually speed and significantly improve the quality of the things being produced and bring it to the biomanufacturing world. We use a lot of AWS technology. Yay, AWS. Control Tower, CloudFormation, all of these things plus any of the development languages that you can possibly imagine that we begin to do these types of things with. And we're using AWS config specifically so we can validate the cloud processes that are happening, but also some of the pieces that we're seeing go through the software that we're writing. And whoosh, resilience. So all of a sudden, resilience comes on the scene, and we start looking at things that look a lot more like an Amazon service chart than they do like an old school workflow. We're going to start looking at ways to simplify and, in some cases, be able to change out the ability for processes to happen at specific factories. It's really neat stuff. We have automation and data that gets collected from these factories, and we're beginning to be able to use that data to speed and specifically make the processes that we have more perfect, more repeatable. So, if the concept here is that humans shouldn't touch data, and the reality is that we have a process that specifically calls for humans to touch data, then the concept that I'm trying to get across in this talk is we shouldn't touch data, and that's great, but we also have to automate it. And as we get into what resilience becomes, this is resilience today. That's a lot of places. If I showed you this map and I asked you how old resilience is, and you didn't know before this talk, how old would you think a company with this many sites is? 15? 50? 50. Okay. Anybody else? 25, 30? Would you believe if I told you it was a little more than a year old? You? And dude, I didn't see where you were at, man. I'm sorry.
Right there. That was a better throw.
That was a much better throw, thank you. So as we look at this, if resilience is a year and a half old, how do we get here? How did we get this many things? Well, it's totally M&A, right? And now if we look at all of the things we just talked about with what biomanufacturing is, and on top of that, we multiply it by this many sites, and specifically, this many people, my life as the Senior Director of Incident Response, Security Operations, and Disaster Recovery becomes very, very interesting very, very quickly. So we go from literally me getting hired in January 2021, to today. That's a huge increase. I had 2 weeks before my first M&A deal happened as I was hired into Resilience. In that 2 weeks, I had to figure out how to literally get the data that we were going to be buying, right? Because we were buying a factory that produced data, and get it into the cloud so that we could begin to make good decisions on the security for that site. And that's where Datadog came in. So as we started looking at how this stuff worked, it became very pertinent and very clear to me that over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, we weren't going to be getting a whole lot more people. And as I came in, I was literally person number 2 in the security team. So we had to figure out, how do we get all of this information into one place and still have enough people to operate all of the things that we had? And NoOps became the thing that we began to focus on very clearly. Now, we definitely had a lot of help. We have great investors that gave us a lot of time and energy and gave us a lot of contacts. And we began to be able to take these NoOps concepts, these DevSecOps concepts, and begin to use them in reality. So we were able to begin to automate the deployment of the things that were happening in the factories that we had created in the world around us. We were using proven platforms. We were using things like SSM. We were using things like Datadog. We were using things like AWS Config. We were able to build out smaller sets of each of these things and arrange to do far more than 2 people should be able to do every day of the week. We've begun to look at the way we can automate quality, and we can begin to build those dashboards so that we can use things like Datadog or other dashboarding systems to evaluate the current functions of the systems that we're using. And we can make sure that everything is always compliant every day, all the time. So one of the things that I've been involved with in the past, and you can go look at some different talks that I've done, are different compliance systems that allow you to build dashboarding and show someone that compliance is happening all the time. And as we look at this and we look at the way the cloud works, one of the biggest ways that we can improve the speed of things is to actually show people a dashboard, specifically an auditor. This is a dashboard of everything that we've done, and this is how it's going to work. And so that's one of the things that I'm really focused on for the next year, is to be able to help build that for the company. Now, this is, in the end, what we're hoping to find out that we can get, frankly. This is something that we're hoping that we can begin to build and we can begin to show our customers as things go forward. Systems where all of the pieces, parts that were historic have become basically new and reused, and we've been able to go ahead and lower a lot of the errors that could happen, potentially, in a process, and begin to remove the manual processes around them. So this is the dashboard slide, or rather the NASCAR slide, as Andrew likes to call it, where basically I'm setting you up for all the wonderful no-ops systems that we use. You'll note that Datadog is in there, Salesforce, all sorts of people that we use so that we don't have to have operations, so that we can then utilize automation, APIs, different things that Andrew will be showing you here in a moment that help us actually meet the need of lots and lots of humans every day inside of Resilience, and then hopefully eventually meet the needs of lots of humans in general on the planet. And this is the final goal. I want to be able to hand you a laptop, an iPad, that shows you where your process is, that lets you see transparently all the way down to each batch what's actually happening in a facility anywhere in the world, and give you a minute-by-minute or a moment-by-moment update. If we look at the way the processes run now, it's really hard to get that kind of data out of 200 pieces of paper. This is what it looks like on the back end for those geeks that are in the audience that still want to see how to do it. This is what we're looking at as far as actual site infrastructure and things that actually occur. But the reality is that all of this is a journey. Now, I really dislike this graphic because it seems like we get to the top and we're secure, yay. That's not really what happens, obviously. It is definitely one of those Zen types of journeys that you have to continue to move on. And it's just part of life. We move towards security at all times. But the concept here is that we move toward an automated deployment of some of the systems that we've discussed.
I'll have you know, I made this graphic.
But I still dislike it.
But the point of this is very real, right? Like, depending on where you are in your journey, you have to reach that first summit at some point before you can start going into these continuous wheel diagrams that we kind of see, and we're going to see some in a minute here. But the point is here that it's really about fundamentals, and this talk is about how to have explosive growth during mergers and acquisitions, and basically stay safe through that. And the way that we do it is to lean into everything that we know is good today, and then apply that to some spaces that we've never applied it before. So you have all these good security foundations that are out there already, like the AWS well-architected framework and the NIST framework. But what maybe you're not doing today, depending on your role, is taking those things and applying them to the way that you're doing operations. And I don't think that we need to necessarily sell anybody on the concept of DevOps anymore, right? Based on your role, you've at least heard or know this is good, even though you may not be practicing it today. Just curious, how many people in the room would identify as a developer? How many people would identify as security focus? How many would identify as other? Wow, so we have a really diverse audience, like almost a third, a third, a third. And so this might be new information for some of you, right? That we want to do this thing called DevSecOps, where we're taking all of the learnings from the last however many years of DevOps, and we're baking security into every part of the process. And I think what's amazing about Resilience's story is that DevOps actually evolved from factory floor and factory floor learnings, right? So if you look at the early ages of DevOps, we learned a lot about process from auto manufacturing, the assembly line concept. And we took that and we applied it to software, we learned, and now we're taking the learnings from software and we're applying it back to Resilience's factory floor. So that's very, very cool. This is kind of a representation of that continuous flow, right? You can look at this diagram of the DevSecOps lifecycle. You can see all these interesting security components at every part of project management. And again, this doesn't always necessarily apply to software. What's good for software is good for the business. What's good for the business is good for manufacturing. and so on and so forth. So it's just taking all of these components of any project, and we're saying, what security steps could we put in this to both detect early and often, and also be able to understand that there's a problem and respond to it? And that's kind of where Datadog comes into Resilience's story, right? As a company that wanted to grow explosively, Resilience really needed a single place where they could house all of that telemetry. And for DevOps, historically, that's meant logs, metrics, and monitoring, but security is now part of Datadog's platforms. We have Datadog's cloud security platform, where we do things like monitoring, security monitoring, compliance, runtime security. And all that can be applied to cloud, but it can also apply to things like factory floor. Earlier this year, I had the privilege to work on this DevSecOps maturity model. It's a really simple assessment that you can just go and do very quickly, and it'll kind of tell you where your company is on their journey to being a DevSecOps shop. And you'll see a lot of these out there for DevOps, but there are very few that are for DevSecOps. And it assesses across these various domains. We don't have time to talk about all of them in this presentation, so we're only going to focus on a couple. The first of which is observe and respond. And you can imagine if you are a company acquiring potentially hundreds or thousands of other companies to scale explosively, you need a way to monitor that as those companies onboard, as risk comes into your organization. Are they more mature? Are they less mature? And how do you get them towards a baseline? So that's where the application of these principles come into ludicrous growth.
Which is actually something our CEO said once, and I just had to laugh and put it in a slide, frankly. So how did we do it? So who knows about the NIST Cloud Security Framework, cybersecurity framework? Yes? A little bit? So we kind of use it in a way to speak to leadership and speak to the site owners and to speak to the other people in the team about the things that need to change for security at the site or at a potential M&A opportunity. Now, I'm going to be very clear with you. It's not meant to do it this way. We're using it kind of outside and on the left of what it's supposed to be used for. But frankly, it works really, really well because I can say to someone, look, we have this cybersecurity framework, and this is how this kind of works. But by the way, we're going to specifically focus on Identify right now. I'm going to come in and talk to you about the different things inside of your facility, inside of your factory, whatever, laboratory, whatever, and we're going to try to understand what those pieces are. And then we're going to go ahead and set up a way to monitor those pieces and begin to protect those pieces in a segmented way as we move through the product cycle, as we move through the cycle of M&A and begin to ingest that new facility into the Resilience system.
So this is the first of two demos that you're going to see in the talk, and I think one of the best things that you can take away from a talk is inspiration to go and try something new. And we don't have time to show you every single system that Resilience has implemented in order to get this sort of rapid onboarding, but this is a piece of the puzzle, right? If you're bringing on a brand new company, let's say they may be in 1 or 100 AWS accounts, and let's say that you decide to work with a partner like Datadog, a platform that can scale almost infinitely with your business. You need a way to take all those systems and configure them rapidly to report that telemetry. You also need a way to ensure that they're going to maintain a consistent state as time goes on. And that's where Systems Manager comes in. So in a minute, you're going to get to see me do a Systems Manager demo that's pre-recorded. So it can be exactly the same in the online experience as it is in the in-person experience. And then we'll come back and we'll spend a minute talking about it. Oh, I'm pushing the laser pointer. You can tell how long it's been since I've been to an in-person event.
With AWS Systems Manager, it's easy to have low-friction deploys of security tooling like the Datadog Agent. The Datadog Agent already has an easy-to-use one-step installation that you can always find in the Datadog console. But what if you wanted to scale that to hundreds or thousands of systems? What if you wanted to ensure that the configuration was consistent 100% of the time across your entire fleet of EC2 instances? That's where AWS Systems Manager comes into play. The Systems Manager agent is an open source, easy to use managed agent that's full of capability. From running commands on systems to proxying interactive console sessions, there's a lot you can do with Systems Manager. For our purposes, we're going to leverage two features in Systems Manager: SSM Documents and State Manager. For the purpose of this demo, let's look at an SSM document. In our case, the SSM document is incredibly simple. We're running the standard Datadog agent installer with almost the same command we can see in the Datadog UI. However, the one minor change we've made is to store the Datadog API key in AWS Parameter Store, another tool in the Systems Manager family. The additional lines above the agent installation are simply using a command line tool to set up YAML files to configure the Datadog agent. In this case, we're enabling process monitoring, cloud workload security, and cloud security posture monitoring. Of course, you could use any DevOps tool of your choice to create this file at runtime. Next, we're going to create an event bridge rule in the CloudWatch interface. Our rule is very simple here as well. We're letting EventBridge know that any time a system reaches the running state, if it matches a specific set of tags, that the SSM document should run and configure the Datadog agent. This is all based on a single tag here used as a filter, but of course you can use any combination of tags you'd like. This means that if a system is terminated or the autoscale group expands, that we'll always have the Datadog agent installed and configured to our preferences. After these are deployed, of course, we want to ensure the configuration stays exactly the way that we'd like it to be. So in concert with that SSM document, we've set up Systems Manager State Manager to ensure that things stay exactly the way that we'd like over the lifecycle of the instance.
So that's pretty cool, right? Systems Manager is an awesome family of products. I think it's been part of the last 3 reInvent demos that we've done together. It's super useful for ops, very useful for security, excellent for compliance. In addition to that, though, we, of course, at Datadog have a whole bunch of different blueprints that you can use to push out our agent to things besides EC2. So we're very well supported across the entire AWS stack, including Lambda and Fargate.
So as we look at SSM for the M&A portion of my existence, when I look at SSM, I see the ability for my team to basically go in and actually be able to inventory and evaluate the things at a site and have them understand both what's there, what's running, and then how they can begin to pull that into the system. Because it is entirely logged, because everything goes into CloudTrail, because there is everything there that we need for a compliance regime, we can actually handle all of those logs and say, look, this is exactly what we did for our change control, this is how it works, and this is why it's okay. That makes the impact assessment much, much lighter for us, and it allows us to be able to speak to quality and say, yes, we'll be able to tell you everything that happened and why and when.
So this is something almost anyone here could do today. If you have workloads in EC2 or you're buying brand new companies, you could roll this out and you can roll out effectively automated telemetry, which is pretty huge when you're talking about scale. And the main driver for that becomes your inventory. It's tagging. And we all know that tags are really good for lots of different things. They evolved out of billing, but they sort of make the world go round in cloud environments. This is just kind of a visual flow of how that process actually works. If you didn't catch every step of that rapid demo, we're just running an instance. As soon as the instance is running, it has the SSM agent on it. All the certified AWS AMIs come with the SSM agent by default. All you have to do is start it and attach the right IAM policy. As soon as it's running, we execute that script that's versioned and warehoused, which is great for the compliance guys. And then the instance is eventually running with the Datadog agent, and we're able to collect all that telemetry almost immediately. This is a shortened version of what the SSM document that I use look like. I only want to point out one portion of this, which is that we're actually getting the API key out of another product from the SSM family called Parameter Store. So we're able actually to securely warehouse that API key in one place If it ever gets leaked, we only have one place to go and update it over time. And so that makes it really secure and super easy to manage over the life of your interaction with Datadog and Systems Manager. So in addition to all this, we're not going to talk about it today, but one of the things that you will want to consider when you're thinking about an M&A strategy is when one of these acquisitions goes wrong. And that, not necessarily the acquisition itself, but maybe something in one of the companies that you might be acquiring in this fictional scenario goes wrong. You need to be prepared to show up and do your best on potentially your worst day through this explosive growth phase. And that's where I do want to just reference this talk from 2019 again, because we do walk you through all that. It's more just kind of a nod to the fact that you do probably want to have a plan, and that plan comes in the forms of run books and playbooks. And these are things that you can manage inside of the Datadog product. We have incident management, we have Datadog notebooks, but the biggest takeaway here is that you do need to assume that the worst will happen. And it will someday. If you have the privilege of being in business long enough, something bad will happen to you. And whether it is a low impact or a maximum impact depends on your level of preparedness here. So definitely go check that out and have a plan for your operations folks, and have a plan to communicate with leadership, because the last thing that you want is to be communicating across and not up on one of your worst days.
So as we look at that specifically in detecting incidents, I want to be very clear that one of the things that I do is incident response, and Andrew and I have done incident response together for a long time now. But prepping and talking to people, most important thing you can ever do. And as you're getting ready to do that M&A, make sure that you have the run books and you understand what that site or the thing that you're actually buying is ready for. Lots of talking, lots of non-judgmental talking.
So I think one of the things that the Datadog platform does an excellent job of is actually detecting incidents, right? Because you cannot respond to, you cannot measure the thing that you don't know is happening. And we do an awesome, especially awesome job of this in AWS. We support tons of other integrations, but I'm just going to talk through the rapid onboarding that you could get by applying a platform like Datadog to 100 or 1,000 accounts in AWS. A few years back, I think it's quite some time now, AWS launched AWS Organizations. And I still remember in the really early days of AWS Cloud Security, we were still preaching like, hey, just turn on CloudTrail. Well, now pretty much everybody does have CloudTrail because they have AWS Organizations. And if you don't know, AWS Organizations has that handy-dandy checkbox in the UI that you can click and say, every account that I pay the bill for must ship CloudTrail for every region to this place. So almost for free now, you get that capability just because you're paying bills and have enabled AWS Organizations. After you have that CloudTrail data, it ends up in a bucket somewhere, an S3 bucket, right? And we can pick up data from anything in S3. We can pick up data from APIs. We have login point as well. But we have this log forwarder that forwards the CloudTrail data to Datadog. And that's where Datadog's security monitoring product comes in. We call it Cloud SIEM. It has a ton of out-of-the-box detections for CloudTrail specifically. And that scales over time automatically with growth. So if you think about this from an M&A scenario, you acquire a brand new company. You want to start paying the bill. At some point during that journey, you join it to the billing org, you automatically start getting those logs into the environment. There's that handy-dandy checkbox I was talking about, enable CloudTrail for all accounts in my organization. Quite seriously, like, if you're not doing this, this is a really quick win, right? After that, though, one of the things that you might want to do is add more context. And we're sort of seeing this as a theme in the industry, right? We went from having no log data to lots of log data, and then we did this thing called correlation, where we wanted to take multiple pieces of log data and then reason about it in a complex way. The problem with correlation is that it can be very compute heavy, right? It doesn't necessarily scale infinitely. So we want to make things a little bit simpler. We want to actually put as much data related to a single event in the original event as we can so that we can reason about it. And that's where our second demo is going to come into play, is adding that additional context. But I'm just kind of setting the stage there as to why you would want to add more context to individual log events. Another place that context can come from are these great dashboards. And if there's anything that we've learned about the cloud over time, it's that the biggest enemy is actually misconfiguration. People aren't necessarily always trying to be malicious. It's just engineering teams trying to get stuff done for your business, and they do and will make mistakes. So what you need is a way to audit that on more or less an infinite continuous basis over time. This goes back to that DevSecOps diagram, baking it into every part of the process. What you're seeing on screen is Datadog's Cloud Security Posture Management. This is a product that if you have Datadog enabled, you can just sort of go and turn it on, and it pretty much goes to work scanning the environment on a very consistent basis to detect misconfigurations that are known poor practice from AWS's list of misconfigurations, from all of the experience Datadog has, and also from common baselines like CIS benchmark. So Cloud Security Posture Management gives you a ton of really useful data, right? And we saw that high-level dashboard, and I can't think of a better place than that dashboard to sort of measure your progress towards being secure, being compliant, or how is this acquisition going. But what you're seeing on screen here now is actually the more sort of detailed view of being able to sort of tick these compliance checkboxes off and on, right? Because you'll want to customize this over time. You'll want to disable the things that aren't of value to you, because the last thing that you want is that dashboard to be too noisy. You never want it to show you things that you don't necessarily care about.
So think about buying a new company and walking in and having a specific list of things to talk about with the CISO from the company that you're purchasing. Being able to say, hey, we need to talk about these 5 things because right now they're red and we need to switch them to green. Makes that conversation really, really easy. It makes the discussion around, hey, we're picking up your Amazon account, or hey, we're picking up your whatever, take your pick, and we're putting it into this thing and we're going to go ahead and have this discussion about it. It lets you have that discussion. It lets it be very specific. It lets it be very comfortable. And just fix the green, fix the red, turn it green, everybody's good.
And then we get to kind of the third pillar, right? We've talked about dashboarding as part of it. We've talked about metrics and monitoring, rapid onboarding as part of this M&A strategy. And then we actually need to, over time, observe behavior. And this is where it actually gets really interesting, right? Because we're not just talking about a misconfiguration. We're not just talking about a developer accidentally opened a security group to the world, because I'm sure that's never happened to anybody here before. But we also need to be able to act on log data, right? And log data can come from a variety of sources. And one of the things that we learned over time in DevOps and DevSecOps is that it's best when we get across the entire stack. We get the application logs, we get the cloud control plane logs, we get the network logs. In our case, for the demo today, we're just using CloudTrail logs, but I do want to stress that this is a feature that gets better the more points of data you send to it. CloudTrail is great as a starting point. If you're not doing anything today, like just start analyzing and alerting on CloudTrail data, because it's a very, very rich JSON structure that gives you a ton of context about what's going on in your environment. And when I say context, that is a term that security people will just throw around all the time. And I should give away a t-shirt if anybody can tell me one example of something that is context-based in AWS.
Uh-oh.
You all have been hanging out with too many security people. So think about things like IP address. Think about things like geolocation as part of the context. Things like, did someone log in using multi-factor authentication? That's all part of an API's request context.
So one of the things that we actually use context for is incoming attacks or incoming IPs. We don't know whether they're an attack or not, but I'm able to evaluate, hey, is this a new IP that's hitting one of our external systems? Or is this something that's coming from a known bad list of things? And I can go ahead and build that context, list of stuff, and then evaluate whether the incoming is a known bad or a known good. In this case, one of the things that we actually figured out was somebody had decided to travel right after the COVID ban lifted and pick up and go to another country. And it was very interesting to all of a sudden see this person's name going different places in the world. Really important to be able to do.
So we see that kind of context surface all the time in classical sim products, things like impossible travel, as Nathan described. You flew faster around the world than Superman could theoretically go. But you can get this context from all kinds of different things that surface in CloudTrail data. Sometimes, though, you need...
Give anybody the shirt. Gee, that's mean.
Well, I'm waiting. I'm going to do the demo, and then I'm going to give one more opportunity to win a shirt. So sometimes you need more data, right, than is provided in the cloud provider's control plane logs, or you might need more data than is in the application logs that your development team has provided. Maybe you're just waiting on that next sprint over the horizon, or you're waiting on that next feature release. So this second inspirational demo, which I hope if you are a Datadog customer today, you will go and try this feature out. It's a new feature in Datadog. It's called enrichment tables. Has anybody ever heard of enrichment tables before today? Good. And this is going to kind of demonstrate how you'll get additional context into a single log event.
In our last demo, we took care of deploying the Datadog agent at scale quickly and easily. In addition to that agent, the AWS integration ingests CloudTrail logs from your AWS organization, as we've described. Datadog ships out of the box with 40 distinct CloudTrail detections. Let's have a look at one that's particularly relevant to mergers and acquisitions. And that's new AWS account seen assuming a role into an AWS account. This detection is interesting for M&A simply because through onboarding, tooling is going to change, and we may want to know what's intentional and what may be attacker behavior. If we look at the default rule, you can see that it's detecting on new user account ID, an element from the CloudTrail JSON structure. Grouping by account, and will only alert after 7 days of data have passed. So there's already a lot of great work here that's been done to reduce potential noise and false positives. Imagine, though, that you're onboarding hundreds of accounts and you'd prefer to only escalate when an account is of a sensitive nature. I like to call this the 3 a.m. problem. When do you decide to wake someone up that's carrying the pager? My favorite answer here is to use risk as a driver for that. If you know that only 10% of accounts, for example, contain highly sensitive data, why not use that as the deciding factor? I'm excited to share with you a new public beta feature in our platform called Enrichment Tables. Enrichment Tables went public beta earlier this year, and I'm sure you'll find tons of applications for them. In this case, we can use a simple enrichment table to add more context to the CloudTrail event as the data comes into the Datadog platform. This works by using the built-in lookup processor to gather data from the table inline. Creating an enrichment table itself is a very simple process. We upload a schema and point the table at a dataset. For our demo, we're using a flat CSV file, but you can also point this at an S3 bucket containing a file. In the case of S3, the content of the table will be automatically updated and maintained over time. Note that we're simply adding two attributes, a mapping of account IDs to friendly account name, and a simple flag that notes whether the account contains sensitive workloads or data. Of course, you could use much more complex risk scores in your organization. Once this is active, we simply add a lookup processor to create the new attributes as logs are ingested to the platform. After this, we can create a copy of the alert and add in our new alerting conditions. Note that now, because we're including filtering on that sensitive attribute, I'm setting the severity to be much higher, which I could use in an incident decision flow for waking someone up. We can also use the alert information to give a first responder more context as well by pulling in variables from the enrichment into the alert message itself. This allows engineers to act quickly and efficiently while triaging the security alert. I hope that this inspires you to go and try out enrichment tables and incorporate risk-based alerting into your security pipeline.
So that was pretty cool, right? I don't know how many people here have ever carried a pager before. Yeah, I certainly did as part of my career, and I think I still have stress every time I hear certain phone sounds. So anything that I can do to reduce that is a huge help, not just to mergers and acquisitions, but also to company culture, mental health, et cetera. And we are going to take some questions at the end, so if you do have a question, we're going to have plenty of time to answer that. But our point here is that all of these things combined, like the philosophy, the technology, these are the drivers that helped resilience grow. And we have this sort of interesting organic process where we had factory floor to software back to factory floor.
The reality of life is that governance is key in everything that we do for DevSecOps. If we don't have governance, we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. We're just making it up as we go. You can't figure out what you need to alert on. You can't figure out what you need to identify as a threat. You can't even really adjust an appropriate risk score. You can't tell what anything really is. It's just you guessing. So governance is the most important thing we can do. In biomanufacturing, we call that sort of quality, because quality is the one that makes all the rules from a, did this actually get created okay? Did we do things correctly? Are the products we're generating appropriate? So that governance ends up changing a little bit. So make sure that when you see some of these words, you adjust them for the industry that you're in.
Yeah, there's a couple other learnings here. I can't stress enough. It may sound very obvious, but the planning is a very important part of all this, right? And doing things like tabletop exercises, or just taking the time during your company's busiest sort of season and sitting down and saying, like, what's the worst thing that could happen, and mapping that all out and what you would do. That's huge. Adding developers to your security team, also huge, but that's another place where you can apply tooling like what we just saw. So that lookup processor, the very idea that in a no-code, no-ops product, we can manipulate log data on ingest, that's insanely valuable. And building recipes for your process instead of doing similar things repeatedly that are a little bit different each time, that pays dividends down the road.
So we'd like to thank you for your time. We're pretty much done with the talk. As far as announcements go, one of the things that's come out of the wonderful growth at Resilience is I have lots of headcounts open, and I would love for some security folks, if you happen to be in the audience, to come talk to us. Happy to point you to the Resilience corporate site or give you a quick talk and figure out where you'd fit in if you'd like here too. We also have a whole bunch of t-shirts that we'd love to give you. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, we're happy to take questions now as well from anybody in the audience. We have 11 minutes left, so if there's a specific topic, just raise your hand, and let's go with you in the front here, and then you next.
So as we are on the topic of the security, can you just use an example that your location
Mm-hmm.
you have been detecting some of the security? So your location itself, that data,
Is
is also considered secure. Secure privacy sometimes with related to data. So how actually, in general, you like to manage the, all the sensitive data? I actually really like the feature you just showed, the enrichment
Mhm.
tool, but I'm just wondering whether you also have some of the classifications or other features to help to classify the data and also be able to capture the data like a masking.
That's an awesome question, and I'm gonna just break it down into a few parts. So the first of which was about geodata. We actually, as an aside, I just want to mention that we do geo enrichment automagically, and I love that word automagically because you don't need an enrichment table for it. Like, there's just a checkbox, and anytime we see an IP address, we'll geo enrich the data. The second part of that question is when you are a company like Resilience that potentially has different classes of protected data, sometimes those will surface in a product like Datadog or a log aggregator. How do you sanitize and safeguard the data? And there's two parts of that, right? The first part is that we actually want to detect the sensitive data, which we just launched a new feature called Sensitive Data Detection that you can use to detect sensitive data and see if you even want it in the log aggregator. If you don't, you can sanitize it. If you do want it in the log aggregator, that becomes a role-based access control problem. And we do support role-based access control if you're using a different product or DIYing your own solution. The access model and the way that you're using potentially cryptography to protect the data becomes a key part of that governance strategy.
And it really does turn into more of a governance question to begin with. Do you even know what specifically is required for you to say that this is special data or not? And then we move through that, and we actually have multiple different layers of things that goes through before it even gets to Datadog.
I believe you had a question there.
It's custom. It's something that we are working on, and we hope to at some point have that we can hand someone just, here's your dashboard, go get the data that you need, and have it be self-managed and self-help effectively.
So for any logs or metrics as well that they're surfacing in Datadog, we have a drag and drop dashboard builder that's really, really useful. So anything that you can turn into a metric, there's a variety of widgets and things that you can use to create different views of your data. A lot of people use it for risk assessment. Some people use it for threat intelligence. We actually, if you stop by the booth, we have an awesome CloudTrail analysis dashboard that's very, very relevant that we didn't show in this talk. So I encourage you to look at that. We also have some very cool features that allow you to share those dashboards using like kind of a link-based sharing mechanism.
So if I can repeat the question. The question is, in CloudTrail, can I see that someone created a role that has the ability to assume a permission? Assume role with web identity.
Specifically federation.
Specifically federation.
So you could do that actually two different ways. So you could use compliance monitoring firstly to make sure that that state doesn't exist and would never exist. Secondly, you could also use an event-based approach in CloudTrail. Because if you think about the common parts of a CloudTrail event, right, you always have the service, in this case IAM. The second part of that is the actual request itself, and then the request context. So the trust relationship is always going to be part of the initial request to create the role. It's also going to be part of the update call.
I would say that it's probably a third way too, because you're going to have the IAM permission, the IAM role itself as it gets created in CloudTrail as well.
Ah. Oh, yep. So absolutely, it's possible to use Datadog security monitoring to identify that single event, because we search that JSON structure pre-indexing, so you can alert on literally anything that's part of the event. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other right there? I'll repeat the question. I think this question is directed to you, Nathan,
Okay.
which is from an experience perspective, how was it to onboard in Datadog's cloud security platform
Oh.
I would also pose the question, based on your experience, relative to other similar platforms that you've turned up over time.
So in an effort not to make a legal problem. So I would tell you that onboarding for the security portions of Datadog, specifically as I think about the cloud compliance and some of the CIS compliance stuff that's there, that was really, really simple. I think the hardest part we had was initially getting all of our accounts, which had existed prior to like any Datadog account being set up, getting those into Datadog initially. And frankly, the biggest issue there was I had 2 weeks. I had very little sleep and I wasn't reading the directions correctly. So I'm going to put that on me. Other than that, I think everything else was pretty much as easy as it could have been, other than potentially I didn't plan appropriately or plan enough, and I didn't get enough tagging and faceting on my data. And again, that's a me thing. We had 2 weeks, I did what I could, and then we had to go back and clean it up a little bit later. And we made lots of progress in that post the initial M&A stuff that I was involved in, and then we've subsequently made lots more progress there too. We actually had hoped to be able to release some of that stuff today as an open source thing, but it just didn't work out.
Thanks, Nathan. Another question over here.
Oh,
So the question was about a feature that we are surfacing in the console right now, which is the Watchdog anomaly detection. The use cases for those are literally the sort of use cases that you would think of for anomaly detection. All of a sudden, after a certain time window of something being very consistent, it becomes inconsistent. If you want a deep dive on the anomaly detection features and how those horizons actually work for the forecast, definitely stop by the booth, because we have somebody from the ML team here who can deep dive on that. And there's like a dedicated space over there right now for ML.
got a guy over here, a guy over there.
So the question was, are the horizons configurable? I actually don't think that today they are configurable. If you think about it from a threat detection perspective, you don't necessarily always want to advertise what your horizons are. So definitely, I would encourage you to stop by and do the deep dive with somebody from that team.
For the compliance part, what the framework does it cover like SOC or HIPAA and all that?
So the question was for the cloud security posture management, effectively compliance monitoring. How many different types of frameworks does it cover? So we have PCI, we have CIS, and I know that we're onboarding more frameworks as we kind of roll out over time, in addition to just rolling out support for more providers. If you sign up for a trial, you'll see them all in the console, all the different frameworks we support. So I'd encourage you to go check it out. Yeah, so I think that we're going to make this the last question because we just have a minute and a half left. The question was for compliance monitoring, and I would also frame this for log ingest as well. As the frameworks evolve over time and as the data changes over time, does Datadog just update that? And yes, absolutely we update that. And as a former security practitioner who used to roll their own SIM and write all their own log ingestions, that is a huge value, because someday, for example, AWS may introduce a new key in CloudTrail. And if you're running your own processor or something, it might actually break your ability to detect threats. So this is one of the areas where having a vendor on your side to do kind of the heavy lifting there makes a lot of sense. Again, we have 45 seconds left, so I want to thank you all for coming to the session today. I'm Andrew Krug. Again, that's who I am on Twitter as well. This is Nathan Case, who has a very long Twitter handle. And we'll be around all week, so like definitely find us if you want to sync with us, talk with us. We're here to talk to you face to face, even though we may have forgot how to do that. So again, thanks.
So everybody.